but pushing 100 now, I felt it was time to share thoughts on YouTube, to share experiences, observations, things I've witnessed, things I've thought about all these years, maybe even more important, things I'm still learning, particularly things relevant to the crisis our nation is in right now. Okay, first a bit about me. I'm a great-grandmother and loving every minute of it. I've lived all over the map. I was born in the South, raised in the North, lived on both coasts, lived in the Middle West and in the Rocky Mountains, and also sometimes living overseas. I have lived through 16 presidential administrations, some of them truly gifted with elements of greatness, others meaning well, so-so, only 2 that I've known who were so power and praise possessed that they were willing to do illegal, evil things when in the face of opposition. But more of that later. Also, it's so hard to know where to begin. I have seen terrible things and wonderful things in my lifetime. Great changes for the good, transformations in our country and world for that matter, for marvelous creative experiences. Also, I've seen devastating darkness. I've lived through a world war. No, back up. I was born just before the Depression, the Great Depression, smashed into the country and ruined so many lives. Great, dangerous crisis then. I also have lived through the great, devastating Second World War, the beginning of the atomic age, 2 minor but devastating wars, enormous cultural art upheaval, unbelievable, and incredible changes in the relationships of race and gender. You too, wherever you are, however, whatever age you are, have lived through terrible and wonderful times. And each of us has a story to tell and learning to share. I think I would like to begin with wonderful changes I've seen in my lifetime. First of all, when I was born, just a few years after women got the national right to vote, there was no such thing as Social Security, welfare, Medicaid, Medicare, no net for people who are out of work, people who were disabled, people who were ill, devastatingly poor. Nothing from the federal point of view, only what private charity could do, and also what little the states could do for these people. And some of the states were able to do a great deal, others practically nothing. So, in other words, nothing to help you. The government didn't care, didn't provide a thing. Enormous change for good. Also, when I was a child, in fact, just a young person really, white supremacy was taken for granted everywhere. No one ever thought of anything else, or very few did. Lynchings were common. Also, terrible racial divisions, gender divisions, things that seem almost unbelievable now. For example, in many states, right up through the 40s, it was illegal to marry a person of another race. The homosexual lifestyle was illegal in many states, and even at best, it was totally unacceptable, considered to be a grave moral, mental, physical abnormality. Big, enormous changes there. Birth control right up to my 30s was illegal in some states. And of course, abortion, even for the most compassionate reasons or reasons of health, was forbidden everywhere. It happened, of course, but swept under the rug like so many things. Abuses, whether child abuse, spousal abuse, abuse in the workplace, abuse in the church, abuse in political groups, mostly denied, ignored, swept under the rug. A huge change in awareness in my lifetime, a huge change in laws about it. Also, the enormous transformations in the treatment of women. When I was a child, very few women tried to enter the workforce or professions. When I began training for professional work, I realized that the so-called glass ceiling, how hard it was for women to get fair and equal treatment, especially when entering professions that had mainly been male-dominated. I was lucky, but so many of my close friends had nightmare experiences. Women in general were expected to stay pretty much in their place. For example, in high school, only one girl had the courage to enter what they call shop class, which was working with machines, tools, and the rest. Only, I think, one boy dared to enter the art class. And I don't think any boys ever dared to enter what is called home economics, which was really teaching you how to plan good meals and keep your family clean and healthy, all extremely important things for men and women both. But tremendous pressure for women to go into one thing, men in the other. If any of you listening to me are young people, you won't believe that women students, university students on campus, had to be safely in their dorms by 10 o'clock every weeknight. If they needed to go out to the library after supper, they had to sign out where they were going, when they left, and sign in when they came back. On weekends, you were allowed to stay out till midnight on special occasions, but still you had to sign out and make it clear just where you were at all times. And even graduate students were subject to room inspections to be very sure you didn't have alcohol in your room. And of course, men and women in the same dorm was unheard of, unbelievable. And there were very few married students on the campuses. That was simply not done. Okay, enormous, wonderful changes in that area. Also, the treatment of old people. Old people, if you were lucky, you could move in with a family who wanted you or relatives. Or if you had enough life savings, remember no Social Security or Medicare, if you had enough life savings to live alone, that was very unusual. If you weren't lucky enough to have a family that loved you and wanted you and didn't have enough savings, you would be put into what is called a home, a euphemism for an institution where you were just sort of parked in a corner and left there. Lucky if the church visited you, or if a traveling library came by. Or at worst, they would put you in a poorhouse. I remember poorhouses were very common. There was one just about a mile from where I lived growing up. I'm not even spoken yet of environmental issues. I never remember anyone talking about, certainly no climate control. That wasn't within the dreams of anyone. But even talking much about the air pollution or water pollution. I remember as a child approaching a big city, you would know it miles away by the dark sky of smog and soot and pollution hanging over the city. Everyone took that for granted, that when you came to a big city it would be like that. And the poisoned lakes and streams from factory debris, a little bit of talk about it, but not much, and certainly no government concern. And of course, in those days, we didn't have much world awareness that we are one world. There was no United Nations. There was a feeble League of Nations formed after the First World War, which the United States made even feebler by refusing to join. But nothing like the United Nations, formed in 1946, in which there was a concept of one world. And up to that time, nations had attended to their own business, each trying to be the wealthiest, the greatest, the most powerful one nation in the world, and never mind what other countries are doing. Yes, wonderful changes, but also tremendous steps backward at various times in our history. We're experiencing one right now. I see a great tendency now on the part of the federal government to send us back to the bad old days of darkness, division, racial hatred, walls of the mind and the spirit, against the knowledge that we, whatever race, whatever gender, whatever religion, whatever books we read, whatever we choose to say, we are one world, one nation. And in the weeks to come, I want to talk more about what I'm experiencing and have experienced, what I'm learning and have learned, with reference to what is happening to us now, with hopes that all of us will become more aware, more alert. Thank you for visiting, and each of us is a member, a living member of this precious one world. Goodbye, see you later.